Excellent. Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Victor Patino, Program Manager. We're really excited to have you today, and thank you for being part of this workshop. Well, I'll have the team go ahead and introduce themselves. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Richard Rendon, and I'm a supervisor in the Office of Grants and Local Services.
Hi, everyone. My name is Natalie B., and I'm also a supervisor in the Office of Grants.
Hello, thank you for joining us. I'm Adela Valdez, and I'm a competitive project officer.
Hi, everyone. My name is Megan Harrison, and I'm also a competitive project officer here with OGALS.
Hey, everybody. My name is Kyle Bolin. I'm one of the competitive review project officers. I'll be presenting today, and thanks for joining us.
Hello, and welcome to the workshop. My name is Nikki Lambert, and I am also one of your friendly competitive review project officers. Thanks for joining us today.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Esmeralda Bermudez, and I'm also a project officer. Quickly going to introduce the team behind the scenes, and we have Sam Cadeau. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, team. So throughout the webinar today, we'll have the main document available for you, which is the application guide. And we also emailed you a chart which explains how we're going to conduct today's workshop. This program is unique in that it has about 7 categories or what I would call sub-programs. And instead of going through all 7 guides and taking about 8 hours, we've found a way to get this workshop boiled down to about a 2-hour presentation based on the volume of questions we received today. And so the chart will list the similarities between each program and the differences. And we're going to use one of the procedural guides, which has the most common similarities and that are applicable to other programs. And we'll point out what programs this is, what other subcategories the guidelines are applicable to. And then we'll get into the differences of each of the sub programs as well. So make sure you have the chart available. We'll show you what it looks like in the presentation opening today as well. And we'll remind you a few times to make sure you have that chart handy to help you follow along during today's presentation. So at that, Supervisor Natalie B. and Richard Rendon will take it from here. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Victor. So the Habitat Conservation Fund program is a local assistance program with $6 million available that we're going to be talking about today. And these $6 million will be available to protect fish, wildlife, native plant resources, in addition to acquiring or developing wildlife corridors and trails, as well as provide programs for nature interpretation programs designed to bring urban residents into park and wildlife areas. So today we have an incredible opportunity to create healthier environments and communities throughout our great state. We're very excited to discuss the Habitat Conservation Fund opportunities with you today. And as Victor just mentioned, we have 7 sub-programs to cover. And before we begin, I want to cover a few items about the webinar. First off is to let you know that we are recording this session, and we will be posting a recording on the HCF webpage for future reference. We also have closed captioning available for the workshop today, and Sam's currently showing how to get that option on. You click the 3 little dots and then scroll down to where it says turn on live captions. For today's webinar, we're going to be using the chat feature. So if you have any questions, please feel free to use the chat feature. If you do not see that little bubble that Sam is circling right now for you, it looks like a little paragraph symbol. If you do not see that feature, please exit and rejoin the webinar. In the past, this often resolves the issue. We do have a team monitoring this chat feature. And so if you happen to see some icons such as thumbs up, smiley faces, hearts, or a hand raised by Victor, That's just our internal way of communicating with each other behind the scenes of who's going to respond to your question. If you happen to run into any major technical problems, please email ogals@parks.ca.gov, and that email is in the chat feature right now. So if you're having any audio or technical difficulties, please email us. Again, we have a whole team behind the scenes that's helping with any of those kinds of issues. Again, we will be recording this session and we'll be posting it on the HCF website if you're unable to keep in the session today. And you may also arrange a call with your assigned competitive review project officer for a one-on-one assistance after the workshop. So now that we're on the HCF webpage, Sam's going to show us how to find your competitive review project officer. It's at the bottom of the page. And it's under assistance, yes, technical assistance contacts right here. You go ahead and click that link. It will bring up a list of project officers. You're going to be using the list in the green column, the competitive project officers. They are assigned by county. So just scroll down till you find your county, and the green column project officer is the one to contact. They're going to be available to assist you from now until March 1st, which is the application deadline. Now we'll review the rest of the habitat conservation webpage. We will be working out of the documents posted here on this HCF webpage today. Again, we have 7 programs to cover, sub-programs to cover. Each application has its own guide, as you can see here. Each one has its own guide as well as its own fillable application form underneath each category. We also have a frequently asked questions document, and it's right here. Thank you. Please review this FAQ document. It has common questions and answers, and it's helpful to use it in conjunction with the HCF application guides. It does address frequent grant administration questions as well, such as the payment process. So if you're interested in that, go ahead and check out the grant administration questions in that document as well. And overall, it's just a great resource to check out after the webinar today. We also have fillable documents that are down, thank you, Sam, circling. These are all fillable forms that you can use while filling out your application, and then you'll be uploading them into the online application system once we have it available. Now let's dive into the timeline. Take a brief look at the timeline for this program. All right, so right now we are conducting application webinars. We have one more Habitat Conservation Fund webinar tomorrow afternoon, same time. So if you'd like to join us again, feel free. The application deadline is in yellow. It is March 1st, 2022, before 5 p.m. So we encourage, once we send out a notification to everyone notifying you that the online application system portal is open and ready to accept applications, we do encourage you to start on your applications right away. And please don't wait until the application deadline at 4:59 to submit. We will take the spring of 2022 to conduct our application review and hope to announce the recommended list of projects by summer of 2022. After that, we will conduct mandatory grant administration workshops. Those will be put on by our grant administration team. You will need to attend one of those workshops. They will help get you set up for that before they will issue the contract or the state local grant agreement. They will also work with you to get that contract fully encumbered, and that's likely to occur in summer or fall of 2022. The grant performance period is the last row here, which is going to start on July 1st, 2022, and it's for 5 years, so you'll have until June 30th, 2027. But you'll notice that those are the dates that costs are eligible for reimbursement. However, little bullet point where it says target completion is March of 2027. So if you're familiar with our office, you'll know that when you have an active project with us, we start, hollering at you and saying, hey, you need to submit your final completion package to us no later than March of the expiring year. And that's just so our staff has time to come out and conduct final site inspections and also come back to the office and process your final payment request and get it out and processed to you before the funds liquidate in June. So that's why your target completion is to have all of your final payments paid out and able to submit your final payment request reimbursement to our office. And then finally, down underneath the timeline, again, is a reminder that we have a list of competitive review project officers, and they are very helpful and friendly and ready to answer all of your questions. Okay, so with that, next up, we're going to look at the agenda. And I know everyone was emailed a copy. If you happen to not receive one, please put your email address in the chat and we'll be happy to send one right over to you so you can have it by your side. The agenda is detailed enough to show how there are similar requirements to all categories and some with unique requirements. And it focuses on understanding the similarities and differences in the 7 categories. If you're just learning about the program or interested in multiple categories, this is a great tool to assist you. Again, please keep it handy and try to hold your questions until the topic comes up, as we will be presenting in this order. And that reminds me, when posting a question in the chat, please start with identifying the program you are talking about, because if we start getting a lot of questions and we get behind in responding in the chat, we'll know which program you're referring to if we're past the topic at that time. We'll begin by reviewing the 7 category chart and outlining the intent for each category, and I'll cover that in a few minutes. After that, we'll dive into the Wetlands category application guide, as this subprogram has the widest range of eligible project types, meaning it covers acquisition and development project types. We'll use this guide as much as possible to cover the similarities, not because we're trying to encourage wetland applications over other categories, but because the Wetlands Guide shares the most consistency between the application checklist items and criteria amongst all the categories. This approach will help reduce the redundancy that can often be found throughout the individual application guides. Now on page 2 of the agenda, this outlines the project proposal, which is also known as the project selection criteria. Once we complete our review of the criteria similarities in the Wetlands Guide, we'll then switch gears and review additional application guides with unique criteria to those subprograms. Okay, so now that we're about to jump into the Wetlands Guide, and this is what the cover looks like. The most recent guides are dated January 1st, 2012, so that's with all subcategories. That is the guide to use for this upcoming cycle. We're now going to go to page 3 and take a brief look at the table of contents. So in every application guide, the table of contents is a very similar layout. So it's going to be in this order. And the key thing to remember is that all words and terms in caps are defined in the back of each application guide. Now we're going to have an overview of the HCF subprograms, or we also call them categories, and we're going to look at the category chart. This chart is found on page 4 of each application guide. And as you can see, the chart identifies each of the 7 project categories, including eligible funding types, cost types, species impact, and project examples. Throughout today, as shown in the agenda, we'll be referring to the subprograms as categories. So category 1 is deer mountain lion habitat. And the intent of this category is to acquire land necessary to protect deer and mountain lions. Category 2 is rare, endangered, threatened, or fully protected species. The intent here is to acquire property necessary to protect these species. Category 3 is wetlands. This category is for acquisition, enhancement, or restoration of wetlands habitats, which are lands which may be covered periodically or permanently with shallow water, and which include both saltwater and freshwater marshes, open or closed brackish water marshes, swamps, mudflats, vernal pools, and fens. Category 4 is anadromous salmonids and trout habitat. This category is for acquisition, enhancement, or restoration of aquatic habitat for spawning and rearing of anadromous salmonids and trout, which are fish that spend most of their adult lives in salt water and migrate to freshwater rivers and lakes to reproduce. Category 5 is riparian habitat. The intent is to acquire, enhance, or restore riparian habitat, which is land-containing habitat that grows close to and depends upon soil moisture from a nearby freshwater source. Category 6 is trails, and you can either acquire or develop for trails which bring urban residents into park or wildlife areas. And finally, category 7 is the wildlife area activities. This is the final category, and it's for nature interpretation, educational, or other enrichment programs intended to bring urban residents into park and/or wildlife areas. It cannot fund capital outlay. So that's one of the uniqueness of wildlife area activities. It's for programming only. Okay, so with that, I am now going to switch hands and turn it over to Esme, and she will continue with the workshop.
Thank you, Natalie. So since we covered the overall intent of the program, let's proceed to page 6 to review the program overview. Great. So under the annual allocation, the HCF program allocates approximately $2 million per year to the California Department of Parks and Recreation. It's been several years since the last HCF cycle. Therefore, we've combined multiple years of funding. As it was mentioned earlier, we have approximately $6 million available. The application filing deadline. As noted earlier, the application must be uploaded into our online application portal submittable before 5 p.m. on March 1st, 2022. We'll actually be sending a separate notification once the application portal is open and ready to accept applications. Under the grant performance period, as Natalie mentioned in the timeline, the grant performance period for each project is 5 years. And will start on July 1st, 2022, and will expire on June 30th, 2027. For the minimum and maximum grant request amounts, although the current guide notes grant requests typically should not exceed $200,000 for this round, up to $2 million may be requested for an application. However, there's no set minimum grant amount. Please request the amount needed up to $2 million to complete the project. Projects in all categories compete for the $6 million available, so there's no designated amount set aside for a particular sub-program. Under the required match, we'll be discussing the match requirement in greater detail. However, please be aware of 2 key points. There is a required non-state dollar-for-dollar match, and the match must be spent on eligible costs under the program. If you have any questions, don't forget to use the chat feature. I will pass it on to Kyle to continue with the workshop.
Thank you, Esme. So please turn to page 7 to discuss eligible applicants. Perfect. So eligible applicants include cities, counties, or districts. Please see the definition of districts on page 36 of the application guide to ensure your district is an eligible applicant. Please note that nonprofit organizations, as well as state and federal agencies, are not eligible applicants for the HCF program. Next, we'll go to eligible projects on the same page here. Please refer to the HCF category chart we reviewed earlier in order to view the list of eligible project types for each sub-program. Ineligible projects, still on the same page. In the middle of the page is a list of ineligible projects that are similar in all of the HCF categories, such as projects arising from mitigation ruling affecting another location are not eligible. Please review the specific list of ineligible projects to ensure that your proposal will be eligible for each category. Now turn to page 9 to review key points about the application process. Thank you. So there is no limit to the number of applications an applicant can submit. Also, each project site must have its own application. An application cannot include more than one category of HCF funding. At a minimum, the project selection criteria must be submitted by the March 1st, 2022 deadline. No revisions to the project criteria will be accepted after this date. For the remainder of the application checklist documents, such as site plans and SQL, we can work with you after the application deadline to complete those items. Next, Megan will give you an overview of the application packet checklist items that are common in all HCF categories. Megan?
Thank you, Kyle. Now we'll go over some directions for preparing the application package. Let's take a look at the application packet checklist on page 10. So here we can see the application package checklist, which is included in each HCF category. Please note that the following checklist items are items that all of the HCF categories have in common. We'll then cover items only applicable to acquisition projects, and then those only applicable to development projects. Only submit the items listed here in the application packet checklist. Please do not submit additional items such as letters of support. We understand the work it takes to get support letters. Projects are scored based on the project selection criteria responses only. If you're required by your director to get the letters of support, please have them addressed to your organization and not our department. If addressed to our staff, it can slow down the application review process. Now please turn to page 12 to view the application form. Each HCF category has its own specific application form. Please use the form specific to the project category you are applying for. Fillable versions are found on the HCF webpage. Complete all applicable fields on the form and have it signed by the applicant's authorized representative. Next, please turn to page 14 to view the authorizing resolution form. Resolutions indicate your governing body supports the project and also designate an authorized representative position to approve forms in the application package. Please use the language provided in this template. Please also note number 5. The resolution requires a designated position, for example, manager, director, etc., not a person's name. The authorizing resolution is a common example of a checklist item that may need extra time to complete, and that's okay. Include a placeholder and a time frame of when the resolution will be adopted. Now please turn to page 15 to view the instructions for both the grant scope cost estimate form and match requirement. The grant scope cost estimate form will be used to establish the expected grant deliverables. All of the recreation features and major support amenities listed on this form must be completed and open to the public before final grant payment is approved. This is what our office, auditors, and the public will expect to see upon final grant payment. On the middle of this page, I want to draw your attention to the directions for establishing the grant scope. This category allows for acquisition projects or development, such as enhancement and restoration. Therefore, the phrases acquire, enhance, or restore will be used to describe the type of work for each recreation feature and/or major support amenity. For Category 6, the Trails category, the form looks the same, while the instructions in that guide are modified to reflect wording the applicant will use to describe a trails project. For example, a scope for that category may read, development of approximately 2 miles of trail around Coyote Creek. For the Wildlife Area Activities category, again, the grant scope cost estimate form looks the same, while the instructions will advise applicants to describe the specific activities, participants, and locations for the program. When we get into the Wildlife Activities Guide, we will review the eligible and ineligible costs for that category, as they are vastly different than all other categories. Moving to the top of page 16 in the Wetlands Guide, major support amenities are described as permanently fixed standalone items such as bridges or native vegetation over $30,000. List these as separate line items. If interpretive signage will be part of the grant scope, it must be included on the grant scope cost estimate form, regardless of cost. So even if it is under $30,000. Next, let's review the information in the box on the middle of this page. If the cost of an item is less than $30,000, it is considered a minor support amenity. An example could be benches. Please fold these minor support amenities, as well as any contingency costs, into the related recreation feature or major support amenity, and do not include them as a standalone line item. And again, that excludes interpretive signage, which should be on its own line. Don't list future phases beyond what will be completed with the grant plus match requirement. Now, please use the chat feature if you have any questions, and I will now turn it over to Adela.
Thank you, Megan. Let's now turn to the bottom of page 17 to review the match instructions. As we've mentioned, this program requires a dollar-for-dollar match. Match must be committed at the time of application. Future fundraising is not considered committed. Let's now proceed to page 18 to view eligible match sources. Eligible match sources include local funds, local general funds, and local bond funds, private funds, donated materials and services, value of donated land for acquisition projects only, and federal funds. Other state funds are ineligible match sources. Rules regarding match are the following. Match can only be spent on eligible costs, as the same rules apply to both grant request plus match. The grant and the required match amounts combined cannot pay for more than 25% of pre-construction costs of the total HCF project. At the bottom of this page, there is an example of how to calculate the match amount for your project. Now let's proceed to page 18, where we will view the actual grant cost estimate form. Please use the applicable phrases to write your scope on this form and the associated costs. Remember, do not list contingency costs as a separate line item, but fold them into the related feature. Indicate the HCF grant and required match costs, which will equal the estimated total project cost. The total project cost, listed here on the grant scope cost estimate form, must be consistent with the estimated total project cost listed on the application form. All figures need to be rounded to the nearest whole dollar. Below the chart is where you'll indicate the match sources, amounts, and the date committed. Let's move to page 42 to view the eligible cost chart. Since each HCF category has its own specific eligible costs, we encourage you to review these charts while developing your project proposal. Again, I want to emphasize the grant performance date, and the ending date is July 1st, 2022 through June 30th, 2027. Costs are not eligible outside of these dates. The target date to complete the project and submit final documents to our office is March 2027. Now let's proceed to page 45 to view the ineligible cost chart. Please review this list and remember that these ineligible costs cannot be charged to the grant, including indirect costs, grant writing, and costs incurred prior to the start of the performance period. Next, Esme will provide an overview of CEQA.
Thank you, Adela. So now let's turn to page 24 to view the SQL Compliance Certification Form. Awesome. So the SQL instructions are actually located on page 23, which outlines 2 items that are required. The first is actually the form, this form that we see here on page 24, and then either a notice of exemption or a notice of determination. Please note these documents must be filed with and stamped by the county clerk. Please ensure that the project description on the notice of determination or the notice of exemption covers the elements described in the grant scope. No further SQL analysis should be needed if the grant is awarded. If SQL is not completed by the application deadline, then it's encouraged to complete and submit SQL within 60 days after the application deadline. If applying for programming through the Wildlife Area Activities Program, also known as Category 7, where it's unlikely a notice of exemption or a notice of determination is applicable. However, the instructions for this category will ask applicants to provide the SQL certification form, along with a letter explaining that the proposed activities do not constitute a project under SQL. So now let's turn to page 25. Awesome. So now we'll review the project completion schedule. Here, please provide a project completion schedule that includes the proposed project keys milestones. Since the site plan is for development only projects, we'll cover it later. But for now, we'll skip ahead to the topographic map to continue with similarities between the majority of the categories. So under the topographic map, which is, with the topographic map, which is required for all categories except for the wildlife area activities category. Here, you're going to provide a topographic map that indicates the proposed project parcels locations. Please depict the project in relation to wildlife corridors or wildlife resources, such as vegetated area, creeks, and other features, including archaeological sites, existing roads, and trails. We actually have a link to the USGS topographic maps in the HCF website under additional application resources. And actually, Sam will show us how to get access to the topographic map link. Perfect. Thank you, Sam. So now let's go back to the guide and let's go to page 25. Great. Now we'll review the project location map. Here, please provide a city or county map showing highways and street access to the project site and within enough detail to allow a person unfamiliar with the area to locate the project. The acquisition schedule, parcel map, and willing seller's letter are for acquisition type projects only, so we'll cover those a little later. We're going to continue on with the consistent checklist items, so we'll move ahead to the project summary, which is on page 27. Great. So for the project summary, please provide a one-page summary that describes the proposed project. The summary will not be scored. Under the project proposal, please include all responses to the project selection criteria questions that we will review in detail shortly. Now we'll turn it over to Nikki to continue on with the workshop.
Great, thank you so much. So we'll continue on this page to review the leases or agreements checklist item. Leases or agreements, applicants will provide a list of all agreements, leases, etc., affecting project lands or the operation and maintenance, excluding those relevant to land tenure if that one is applicable. Next, we have required regulatory permits, and this one is not applicable for Category 7, which is the wildlife area activities. And applicants will please provide a list of existing and additional required permits, the status of each, and indicate when permit approval is expected. Some examples of permits would be a fish and game permit, or maybe something from the Army Corps of Engineers. Next up, we have the land management plan for project lands previously acquired with habitat conservation funds. This one is also not applicable for Category 7, that wildlife area activities. If applicants propose a project on land that was previously acquired with habitat conservation funds, they will describe the management plan that should include efforts to reasonably reduce possible conflicts with neighboring land use and landowner. Moving along to page 28, we'll have the photos of the project site, which is also the final checklist item. Applicants will upload photos of the project site sufficient to show the area or areas to be acquired, enhanced, restored, or developed. And these should include a caption that describes and identifies each photo. So this concludes checklist items that encompass all categories, with the few exceptions we mentioned for the wildlife area activities, which is Category 7. Please use the chat feature if you have any questions. And next, Adela will give an overview of the additional checklist items that are required for acquisition-only projects. Adela?
Thank you, Nikki. Next, we'll address the additional items that pertain to acquisition-only projects. The instructions are located on page 25. However, we're going to view the actual acquisition schedule form on page 26. Please fill out this acquisition schedule form outlining the acreage and parcel number or numbers to be acquired, estimated acquisition date, and estimated value of each parcel to be acquired. Further instruction is below this chart with information to include. Let's now proceed to page 27 to discuss the final checklist item for acquisition projects. Please provide a county assessor's parcel map showing the parcel or parcels to be acquired through fee simple or a permanent easement. The parcel numbers reflected on the map must match those listed on the acquisition schedule. Also, provide a willing seller letter from the landowner. This letter does not need to include legally binding language. A simple statement showing that the seller is willing to sell, should the grant be awarded, is all that's needed. If the project is to acquire a permanent easement, please submit a copy of the proposed easement language for our review. Permanent easement agreements must guarantee the authority to use the property for the purpose specified in the application. Now, Megan will cover the final application checklist items pertinent to development-only projects. Again, this will include enhancement, restoration, and trail development.
Thank you, Adela. Let's turn to page 20 to take a look at land tenure. If the project site is owned in fee simple by the applicant will submit the ownership documents such as a deed or deed recordation number indicating the applicant has title to the property. If the applicant does not own the land, the applicant will provide an agreement between the applicant and landowner that, at a minimum, addresses all the elements of the land tenure form on page 22. And we'll go take a look at that. So this is the land tenure form. Please note the term of the agreement is either 10 years or 20 years, depending on if the grant amount is up to $100,000 or over $100,000. Include this completed form along with the agreement. If the land tenure agreement is a draft at the time of application, follow the instructions at the bottom of page 20 and onto the top of page 21. And we'll go take a quick look at where those instructions are. So this starts on page 20. So there you can see on page 20 under alternate requirements, there is information on if the agreement is an unsigned draft. And then moving on to page 21, at the very bottom of 20 onto 21, this also discusses what to do if you cannot agree to either 10 years or 20 years of land tenure up front. So now we'll take a look at the site plan, which is also only required for development projects. And that is on page 25. So please upload a drawing or depiction indicating the scale, project orientation with a north arrow, and where the proposed improvements will be located. The site plan should also indicate access points to the site and the location of any interpretive signs. The final checklist item for development, enhancement, or restoration projects can be found on page 28, and it's the Conservation Corps involvement process. So as you can see, it's right there under photos of the project site. And for these types of projects, Conservation Corps involvement in projects is encouraged to the extent achievable. The applicant is required to contact both the California Conservation Corps and the local certified Conservation Corps to obtain feedback on whether either can participate in the project. You'll see as we get to the project selection criteria how points will be awarded for projects that use the Corps services. Now let's take a look at the Conservation Corps document on page 29. An updated consultation form is available on our website. The names of contacts are found under the additional application resources on the HCF webpage, which Sam showed us earlier. Be sure to send one form to each contact. Then upload the response forms from both entities in the online application portal. Next, Natalie will orient us with a handy criteria chart that was emailed to you along with the agenda.
Thanks, Megan. All right, so here's basically it's like a part 2 of the agenda, and it's the criteria presentation order that we will be covering using the Wetlands Guide. Again, as our example, this chart basically shows the criteria breakdown by topic. So we have threat, site access, stakeholders, applicant capacity, and so on. This chart is also a handy tool to keep with you because you can see the page number that we'll be reviewing these topics in the Wetland Guide. And then it also lets you know which other category it's applicable to and which ones it's not applicable to. So again, if you're interested in more than one category, this is another good resource that you can keep with you as you go through. And so the second box, if you scroll down just a little bit, talks about criteria that is not covered above, because these topics that you'll see here in the right-hand column is also by topic, such as habitat corridors and adjacent land uses. Those two topics in the project selection criteria are only applicable to the procedural guides, which is the left column. Only applicable to, for instance, in that is deer and mountain lion habitat, and also the rare, endangered, threatened, or fully protected species. So we will review the deer and mountain lion habitat guide and cover habitat corridors and adjacent land uses once we go through the wetlands guide. Again, we'll be able to use the wetlands guide for the majority because we'll be able to hit all 10 of those criteria. And then we will jump into the additional procedural guides and cover the remaining topics that had not yet been covered previously. So again, if you happen to not receive this chart and would like a copy, please let us know what your email is in the chat and we can send one over to you. And now I will turn it over to Esmeralda and she will start us off with the project selection criteria. Again, staying on course of reviewing the wetlands guide. And please keep using the chat feature for any questions. Thanks.
Thanks, Natalie. So we'll continue review still using the Wetlands application guide as we examine the project selection criteria requirements. So now let's take a look at the criteria overview on page 30. The project selection criteria for each category is often similar, and as we mentioned earlier, we will make sure to lessen repetition by continuing our review using this guide, which has the most consistency amongst all categories. Once we've covered the similar topics, we actually will switch gears and review the other guides where the criteria is specific to a particular category. So no matter the category, we all have a total of 100 possible points. Everyone starts with 0. Points can only be gained. At the bottom of page 30, as you can see, the overview of criteria and the associated point values. Each criteria is followed by a descriptive rubric identifying the range of points to be gained. So with that said, let's begin to criteria number 1. And that's going to be on page 31. Okay, criteria number 1 is threat and is applicable to all categories, with the exception of trails and wildlife area activities. Here, the applicant will describe any existing or potential harm or danger to the project site, and overall consequence if the proposed project cannot occur. So as you can see, 15 through 11 points will be awarded to projects where a significant threat to the project site and/or target species exist. 10 through 6 points will be awarded to where there's a moderate threat, and 5 through 1 points will be awarded to those with the minimum threat. So now let's turn to page 32 to see criteria number 2, which is site access. And this criteria is applicable to all categories. So for the program's legislation, the public should have access to the project site except when access may interfere with habitat protection. Applicants will describe the plans for public access by the time of project completion by providing details on the following items, A through E. A, reasonable entrance fees, parking fees, membership fees, activity fees, or no fees. B, on-site or close by parking. C, easily available public transportation, bike lanes or trails. D, flexible hours, hours that accommodate target audiences. And lastly, E, solutions to any physical, financial, and/or cultural barriers, obstacles to the project site. For acquisition projects, applicants will respond and be scored based on the planned future user access. So now let's view the rubric below. As you can see, if the project site is accessible via all 5 items, 10 points will be awarded. So now let's turn to page 33, which will review criteria number 3, and that is stakeholders. And criteria number 3 is applicable to all categories. Here, the applicant will describe the efforts to involve interested parties within the last 2 years, such as community-based stakeholders, nonprofit partners, or other public agency partners in the project planning and/or implementation. In the response, please include the following. A, methods used to notify interested parties on the input opportunity. B, methods used to obtain the interested parties' ideas. And C, how the interested parties' ideas were incorporated in project design and/or implementation. The maximum number of points will be awarded to those applicants who make a joint effort to involve the broadest representation of interested parties in the process. Now we'll turn it over to Adela to cover the next criteria.
Thank you, Esme. Criteria 4 is very similar in nature amongst all categories, but applicants will respond based on the type of project being proposed. Let's now move to page 34 to view criteria number 4, applicant capacity. Applicant capacity is applicable to all categories. Later, Kyle will review the slight difference related to applicant capacity for the wildlife area activities category. For acquisition projects, applicants will respond to their knowledge and/or experience of the process to A, identify the appropriate and available property, B, negotiate terms of sale with the landowner, and C, secure the appropriate agency or agent to facilitate escrow transactions. For development, enhancement, or restoration projects, applicants will describe their ability to complete a project as it pertains to A, designing a project to maximize sustainability, B, managing project completion schedule to ensure timely completion of milestones, and C, monitoring project outcomes to ensure they remain as intended. For all categories, OGALS will also review its own records and consider the applicant's performance history with OGALS as part of the project selection process. This includes reviewing the applicant's ability to complete previous grant-funded projects on time, timely submission of project status reports and payment requests, and to adequately operate and maintain previous grant-funded sites. As you can see in the rubric at the bottom of this page, applicants that address significant capacity will be awarded maximum points. Before Richard discusses criteria number 5 through 9, we'll take a 5-minute break. This workshop will resume at 2:30. Thank you.
Okay, welcome back from break. So now we're going to move on to criteria number 5, species presence on page 35, which is applicable to categories 1 through 5, which is all of them except trails and wildlife area activities. Here, applicants will describe the presence and variety of species that currently exist at the site. For example, in this wetlands guide, this is specific to identification of the variety and occurrence of the Department of Fish and Wildlife special animals and or special plants that presently exist on or near the project site. The pathway to the Department of Fish and Wildlife webpage link in the guide has changed. So now we'll show you how to get to these lists from the HCF webpage. So as you can see here, it is contained down here underneath the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. And Sam will be circling the link. And if you go ahead and click on that, then it will come up with the lists of both special animals and special plant species. And so here are the lists for each of the plants and animals. So once you find it for your area, you would just go ahead and upload a copy of the web link page that identifies the species. Keep in mind that a maximum of 10 points will be awarded to wetlands project sites which have 4 or more targeted species currently on or near the project site for reproduction, wintering, migration, or other critical life history stages. Or on page 36, if the species are not currently on or near the project site, then you're going to go ahead and respond to question B. You will describe how the species will be present at the time of project completion. In other words, how will this project afford the opportunity that these animal species or plants will exist at or near the project site by the time of project completion? Again, please upload a copy of the Fish and Wildlife webpage that identifies those species. So for criteria 6, invasive plant species on page 37, this is applicable to categories 3, 4, and 5, which are wetlands, anadromous salmonids, and riparian. This criteria addresses if invasive plant species exist and are impacting the site. Applicants will describe the current site conditions. For proposed acquisition projects, if the property to be acquired is dominated by native plant species, the maximum of 15 points will be awarded. If the project is for enhancement or restoration, applicants will describe how the following activities will be implemented. A, establishment of a local long-term action plan and available funding to continue prevention or control the spread of invasive plant species. B, effective containment efforts. And C, evaluation of treatment effectiveness, including the next year's growing season. Applications that implement all 3 activities will be awarded the maximum 10 points as noted here in the rubric. The next criteria is applicable to category 3 only, which is wetlands. Criteria 7, habitat extent is on page 38. You will note that the ideal wetlands habitat project would result in a wetlands environment that covers the majority of the project site. Applicants will respond to this criteria by describing how many acres of wetlands will result on site and what percentage of the land will be in native wetland habitat. The maximum number of 10 points will be awarded to project sites that have a native wetland habitat comprising 70% or more of the project site by the time of project completion. Please use the chat feature if you have any questions. And so now I will turn it back over to Megan. Megan?
Thanks, Richard. Criteria number 8, environmental elements, is found on page 39. Criteria number 8 is applicable to Category 3, wetlands, as well as Categories 1 and 2, which are the deer and mountain lion and rare, endangered, threatened, and protected species categories. This criteria focuses on the environmental elements which are or will be present at the project site by the time of project completion that are known to be important for the setting. The optimal environmental elements for wetlands are the necessary hydrological processes, no significant barriers that prevent flooding, erosion, and deposition, low risks of changes to water flow or quality, and adjacent land uses that minimize the risks to the project site. Projects that have all 4 environmental elements will receive maximum points for wetlands. Please note that categories 1 and 2 have the environmental elements criteria. However, these are geared toward the environmental elements present at the project site that are known to be important to the maintenance of current deer, mountain lion, or rare or endangered species population levels. Optimal environmental elements for categories 1 and 2 are seasonal and transitional ranges, unique areas or habitat types such as fawning areas, and water resources and/or riparian areas. Criteria number 9, conservation plan, is on page 40 and is applicable to categories 1 through 5 only. It's not applicable to the trails or activities program categories. A project that satisfies a high priority need and is discussed in detail in one or more adopted plans, such as Natural Community Conservation Plan, Habitat Conservation Plan, Riparian Bird Conservation Plan, Watershed Plan, Bay Delta Ecosystem Restoration Program Plan, etc., will receive the maximum 5 points. Criteria number 10, Conservation Corps involvement, is on page 41. This criteria is only applicable for development, enhancement, or restoration projects in categories 3 through 6. It's not applicable to acquisition projects or activity programs. Applicants who contact both the California Conservation Corps and the local Conservation Corps and provide the complete response form from both organizations and the consultation results for the project will receive 5 points. If the Corps decline, but the applicant went through the consultation process, 5 points will still be awarded. If the Corps states it is feasible to work on the project, but the applicant declines, full points will not be awarded. This ends the review of the Wetlands Application Guide. Esme will now provide you with an overview of the specific criteria for categories 1 and 2, the deer and mountain lion, and the rare, endangered, threatened, or fully protected species categories.
Great, thanks, Megan. So now we're jumping into the Deer Mountain Lion Habitat Guide. Great, thank you, Sam. We'll actually be using this guide as an example to cover the 2 unique criteria that are applicable to these acquisition-only categories. So now let's go ahead and turn to page 30 to view the first unique criteria. Awesome, thank you. And so criteria number 6 is habitat corridors. Applicants will describe how the proposed project will protect or establish a habitat corridor linking 2 or more for the deer mountain lion habitat areas. Similarly, for the rare, endangered, threatened, or fully protected species, the applicant will address how the proposed project will protect or establish a habitat corridor for these species. The maximum number of points will be awarded to project sites that will link at least 2 isolated or separated for the deer mountain lion habitats, or will link at least 2 isolated or separated target species habitat areas for the rare endangered category. So now let's jump to page 32 and we'll review criteria number 8, which is adjacent land uses. And it's only applicable for these 2 acquisition only programs. So here, please respond to this criteria by describing how the surrounding adjacent lands are used currently. Positive adjacent land uses could include the following: A, potential for conservation easement, B, minimum public safety concerns, and C, public wildlife areas. For example, is the adjacent land an existing wildlife refuge, national forest, or designated park area? Under the neutral land uses could neither positively or negatively impact the project site, and under negatively land uses could include the following: A, potential for increased requests for depredation permits, B, potential for public safety concerns, and C, adjacent land uses that would harm the project site, such as the proximity of light industrial activity, livestock overuse, or etc. Projects where the surrounding land uses have at least 1 positive impact on the project site will gain the full points. Neutral impacts will gain 5 points, and if there is 1 or more negative land uses, 0 points will be awarded. Now let's go ahead and switch gears to review criteria unique to categories 4 and 5 only, which is the anadromous, salmonids, trout, and riparian subprograms. If you have any questions, please utilize that chat feature, and I will turn it over to Adela.
Thank you, Esme. Using the anadromous salmonids and trout guide as the example guide for the next 2 unique criteria, we'll skip ahead to criteria number 7 and criteria number 8, which are the same topics in both the salmonids and riparian guides. So let's proceed to page 37 to view criteria number 7, site elements. The ideal habitat for riparian, as well as for anadromous salmonids and trout, includes necessary hydrological processes to maintain appropriate aqueous habitats, which could include the influence of human-made structures. Project sites that currently have or will have by completion all 6 elements described in A through F will be awarded 10 points. These elements include A, water quality characteristics suitable for anadromous species, B, level of drainage that maximize water quality, C, regulated use of importation of non-native fish predation, D, unrestricted fish passage both upstream and downstream, E, riffles, runs, pools, and in-stream woody debris and/or boulders suitable for spawning, and F, levels of monitoring that minimizes pollution and illegal water diversion. Now let's move to page 38 to view criteria number 8, riparian conditions. The ideal riparian, as well as anadromous salmonids and trout habitat, includes an optimal site environment on both sides of the stream. Applicants will describe the current conditions on each side of the stream channel. Ideal conditions include A, riparian community composition, B, habitat that extends at least 45 feet on each side of the waterway, C, multi-storied habitat, and D, adjacent land uses that minimize the risk to the project site. Project sites that include all 4 elements will receive the maximum 10 points. Again, all other requirements we've already covered. This concludes our review of categories 4 and 5. Now, Kyle, Nikki, and Richard will cover the final 2 categories, categories 6 and 7, trails and wildlife area activities that are quite different than the 5 we've just reviewed, and based on previous HCF cycles, are our most sought after categories. Now here's Kyle.
Thank you, Adela. Trails is the 6th HCF category. We're going to jump ahead to the unique criteria for this program only. So we're going to jump to page 32, criteria number 1. Perfect. If proposing an acquisition, applicants will describe any existing or potential harm or danger to the project site and overall consequences if the acquisition cannot occur. For a development project, applicants will describe the need and overall consequences if the program or trail development cannot occur. Maximum points will be awarded where there is significant threat or significant need. Next, we're going to go to page 36 for criterion number 6. Connections. Perfect. Applicants will describe how the trail connects people to parks and/or wildlife areas. The description should include how the connections are in relation to A, neighborhoods, B, school sites, and C, employment locations. For acquisition projects, respond per the future planned trail use. To obtain a maximum of 10 points, the project will need to provide connections to all 3. I will now turn it over to Nikki to cover criteria 7 and 8. Nikki.
Thank you, Kyle. So criterion number 7 is for sustainable design features, which is on page 37. Applicants will describe how the project will use each of the sustainable design features during trail development, and they're listed here on page 37, as you can see, A through G. So design features which are not applicable to the project should be noted as such and will not have an impact on the score. I'm just going to read a few off here. So let's look at B. So we're looking at trail grades that are designed for season of use, soil types, and user types to minimize erosion. Minimal use of complex trail structures, this is C, such as turnpikes, causeways, etc., unless needed to accommodate curved linear design. We have E, trail design that utilizes recycled materials. And then reading letter G, we got trails that avoid or minimize impacts to protect habitats. Now for those acquisition projects, you'll want to respond as per the planned trail use. Next, we have criterion number 8, which is the interpretation opportunities, which starts on page 37 and continues onto page 38. Applicants will describe how the project will encourage participants to interpret the area or areas on or immediately adjacent to the trail. If an opportunity is not applicable, applicants will indicate not applicable or N/A and provide a brief explanation. An optimal project site will include the following interpretation opportunities, which are also listed here, A through D, and that is natural, cultural, historic, and scenic. For acquisition projects, this criterion will be scored on the applicant's statement of what planned points of interest will be on or immediately adjacent to the trail after project completion. So it's recognized that there may be a time period from project completion until a future date when such points of interest can be identified. If that is the case, applicants should address this issue. And please use that chat feature if you have any questions. And now I will turn it over to Richard, who's going to cover the rest of the criteria for the trails category. Richard?
Thank you, Nikki. So moving on to criteria number 9, trail plan, which is on page 39. In this criterion, applicants will name the adopted applicable plan or plans and describe the project's priority in those plans, such as a local master plan, site development plan, a U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service plan, etc. Projects which satisfy a high priority need in one or more plan will receive the maximum 5 points in this criterion. So now I will turn it back over to Kyle, and he will walk us through the Wildlife Area Activities Guide, which is category number 7. Kyle?
Thank you, Rich. The previous 6 habitat conservation programs we have discussed are for capital outlay. Our 7th and final category is the Wildlife Area Activities, which is for nature interpretation, educational, or other enrichment programs intended to bring urban residents into park or wildlife areas. These projects cannot include capital outlay expenses. Before we dive into the unique criteria, there is one application checklist item that we did not cover in our review of the Wetlands Guide. And the checklist item is only relevant to the Wildlife Area Activity subprogram. And that's going to be on page 19, checklist item number 4, Activity Site Assurances. We'll cover this briefly as it is somewhat similar to land tenure for development projects that we discussed earlier. Basically, this requirement is to ensure the applicant has the right to perform activities at the proposed site. If the applicant owns the property, simply provide evidence of ownership such as a deed. If the applicant does not own the land, the requirements are listed here on page 19 and 20 that state at a minimum, the applicant and landowner need to have a draft agreement, whether it is an easement, a permit, or other use agreement that provides assurances the landowner authorizes the activities to occur and agree to sign the agreement should the grant be awarded. Now we'll skip ahead to discuss the project selection criteria that is unique for this category, and I'll turn it back over to Rich.
Thanks, Kyle. So before we jump into the unique criteria, which begins with criteria 5, I would like to let you know about some nuanced differences in criteria 1 and criteria 4 for this program. So under criteria 1 on page 24, which is labeled as need. Thank you, Sam. This criterion is similar to what we have already discussed in other categories, yet a bit different due to the nature of the sub-program. Here, applicants will describe the need for the Wildlife Area Activities Program, including why would participants not have the opportunity to experience the wildlife area activities if the proposed project is not selected for funding. In this criteria, maximum points will be awarded if a significant need exists. In criteria 4 on page 27, which is labeled applicant capacity, this criteria is also very similar to what we just previously discussed in the prior categories. However, applicants applying for this category will describe their ability to complete the proposed program based on their ability to provide a comprehensive management process based on the following: A, management of group interaction and the use of adaptive techniques to engage participants in learning, and B, assimilate program improvement ideas and incorporate those ideas into future program offerings. Those who demonstrate the capacity to carry out the program will be awarded maximum points. Now on to the beginning of our unique criteria, which is criteria 5. This one is labeled program description, which is on page 28. Thank you, Sam. Here, applicants will describe the project, providing a clear, detailed explanation of the A, goals and objectives of the project, B, the project's long-term community impact, and C, the targeted population groups to be included in the project activities, such as participants' ages, genders, ethnicities, and community-based nonprofit organizations, etc. Applicants who provide a detailed explanation of all three elements will obtain the maximum 10 points in this criteria. On page 29, criteria number 6, site locations and activities. You'll notice that this criterion is broken into 2 parts, and each one is 5 points for a total of 10. So in part A, site locations, applicants will describe the proposed park and/or wildlife area locations at which the project will be conducted. Include the following: the names of the locations, a description of the proposed project site location, and the reasons the proposed project site locations were selected. And then in part B, site activities, applicants will describe the actual wildlife area activities the participants will experience, and they will include the following: A, the number of activities for the same participants, B, a description of the specific project activities proposed, and finally C, the reasons the proposed project activities were selected. Applicants who address all of the items will receive the maximum 10 points. Now, I will turn it back over to Nikki and she will continue with the criteria. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Rich. Appreciate that. So criteria number 7, partnership opportunities on page 30. Here, applicants will describe how they will work with other agencies, and some examples of those would be a governmental agency, nonprofit organizations, schools, senior groups, volunteer groups, etc. And you'll describe how they'll work with the agencies to complete the project. So the description should encompass each partner's, and you'll see you want to list all these things shown A through E, and that is A, knowledge of wildlife areas, B, skills and abilities that assist the project participants, C, capacity to provide in-kind services, and those are things like equipment, supplies, and labor, among many others, of course. Then we have D, the capacity to provide funding support. And then E, the potential to contribute to the project's longevity. So applicants working with partners that can provide assistance in all 5 areas will receive the maximum 10 points as shown in the rubric. So next we're going to look at criteria number 8. And this is your pre-activity knowledge evaluation, and it is found on page 31. Here, applicants will describe how they will evaluate and document the participants' level of knowledge before the wildlife area activities occur. The evaluations should include the following objectives, and those are listed A through D here on the page we're looking at. So your evaluation should include A, the relationship of an urban ecosystem to the wildlife area ecosystem. B, the need for wildlife areas and habitat protection. C, preparedness and safety practices for the wildlife area activities. And those can be appropriate equipment and clothing. And then we have D, the participants' current comfort level with proposed activities. So the maximum number of points, as you can see here in the rubric, will be awarded to projects where all 4 objectives will be evaluated and documented. And so we just discussed pre-activity knowledge. Now we're going to look at criteria number 9, which is the post-activity knowledge evaluation. That's found on page 32. So the purpose of the post-activity evaluation is actually twofold. So you want to evaluate and document both the activity's short-term effectiveness and the relative long-term effectiveness. Now, similar to criteria number 8, applicants will describe how they will evaluate and document the level of participants' knowledge immediately after the last event occurs. And remember, in criteria 8, you were doing the before. But additionally, applicants will describe how they will document the participants' activity knowledge retention for at least 3 months after the last event occurs. So you'll be doing immediately after, as well as trying to gain that retention. So these evaluations for the post-activity knowledge should include the following objectives, and you'll see they are listed here on the page, A through D, and I'll go through these as well. So we have A, the relationship of an urban ecosystem to a wildlife area ecosystem. B, the need for wildlife areas and habitat protection. C, that use of personal preparedness and safety practices for the wildlife area activities. Again, that's the appropriate equipment and clothing. And then D, this is a little different than 8. This is the participants' comfort level with future participation in similar activities and or visits to the same project locations. It is important to note that the maximum number of points will be awarded to projects which provide the methodology to evaluate and document the participants' understanding of each of the objectives for criterion 8 and 9. So that's the end of the criterion. Next, we will discuss costs. Let's take a look at eligible costs found on page 33. So this section provides some examples of the non-capital outlay cost for projects. Applicants should remember that only direct costs are eligible. So a few examples of some eligible costs are project management and accounting. This does exclude grant writing, so please note that. Another eligible cost is activity supplies and materials necessary for the program. So items such as t-shirts, caps, beverage containers, importantly, educational materials, evaluation tool supplies, and many other things are eligible. If you have questions, you can always reach out to your project officer. Now let's take a look at those ineligible costs, which are found on page 34. So here's a list of some of those ineligible costs, and they're pretty much the same as all the other Habitat Conservation Fund categories, except for the addition of capital outlay costs. So please use that chat feature if you have any questions about what I just discussed, and then I'm going to pass the baton to Richard.
Thank you, Nikki. So finally, technical assistance is the final item that we'll discuss today. So Sam, if we could go to the website and if we could scroll down to the technical assistance portion. Perfect. Thank you, sir. So here, today's HCF application workshop is just the start of technical assistance. You will have access to your competitive review project officer all the way up until 5:00 p.m. on March 1st, 2022. So please do reach out. Please do reach out to them. They are always happy to answer any questions that you may have. So keep in mind as a reminder, you will be contacting the project officer in the green column under competitive project officer. So project officers may work with you on incomplete items, incomplete application items after the March 1st, 2022 deadline, with the exception of the project selection criteria, which is frozen at 5:00 p.m. on March 1st, 2022. We're always here to help you along every step of the process. As previously mentioned, our Habitat Conservation Fund frequently asked questions online document is another great resource for you. And Sam is circling it right here. This document contains key information. This document contains key information and reminders to completing the application thoroughly. It is a beneficial tool for your final review before submitting your application to us via online application portal submittable. Also, there are several fillable forms located on the HCF website for your convenience under Habitat Conservation Fund fillable application forms. So that is also on the HCF webpage. So just as a recap, we strongly encourage you to reach out to your competitive review project officer for any questions on the Habitat Conservation Fund program. Sam, can we bring up the timeline to kind of reorient people back to the timeline here and see what type of time frames we're focusing on? So here you'll notice that we are in November of 2021. These are our application webinars. These kind of signify the beginning of our technical assistance season, which will last all the way until March 1st of 2022. Then after that, there may be some supplemental technical assistance that will go on from our project officers if they contact you with the need for more information or revised forms. So during the spring, that application review will take place. In the summer of next year, our department will announce our recommended projects. Then from that point in the summer and into the fall of next year, there will be mandatory grant administration workshops taking place to ensure that everybody knows what they're getting themselves into going forward. And at that time, there will also be state and local grant agreements will be signed, sealed, and delivered. And then finally, keep in mind that if you are selected for a project under this round, that your grant performance period will be, as Natalie said earlier, July 1st, 2022 through June 30th of 2027. And keep in mind that your target completion date should be on or before March of 2027. So with that, I think we are done. Just another final reminder, another plug-in for the application deadline, which is March 1st of 2022, by or before 5:00 p.m. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Victor. Victor, it's all yours.
Okay, thank you so much, Richard and team. So here's a little bit of an encouragement here, or a reason for excitement. 6 million available in this cycle is more than, it's about triple, I believe, compared to prior years, and that is because we've combined about a few fiscal years into one competitive cycle. Why is that important? Well, obviously, I mean, it probably means that you'll even have a better chance at funding this cycle if the competition will be similar to prior years. In prior years, I'd say roughly the amount requested was maybe $2 requested for every dollar available, and that was only about, I'd say, 3 to 4 million requested in some prior cycles. So our hope is that we at least get $12 million in requests to award 6 million in applications. So I do encourage you to ask for up to 2 million. I don't think that we would only select 3 projects for the full 6 million at 2 million each. But in the past, the average grant request was pretty low at, I'd say, roughly 200,000. And you can do the math. If our average request this cycle is only 200,000 per application, we're going to need a lot of applications to reach the $6 million target. So don't let the past cycles steer you in terms of how much you're requesting this round. I do encourage you to be more aggressive in terms of the amount you will request this round. Also, we said this in the prior workshops for the Recreational Trails program, as well as the Land and Water Conservation Fund program. You can theoretically use each of those programs as match for each other. For example, for the Land and Water Conservation Fund, at least 50% of the total project cost will need to be matched, which is the same as this program. So let's say you have a total project of $4 million, for example. You could, in concept, and you don't have match from other sources committed. So we do know match has been a challenge for this program and Land and Water in the past because it's 50%. Well, you could, in concept, submit a $2 million application through this program and $2 million through HCF for, I'm sorry, through Land and Water for a $4 million total project. And, you know, we could, in theory, select both applications and your match would then be taken care of. Now, I'll say that if you try that approach, it's going to be all or nothing. You know, we would not partially fund your project in a situation where you're lacking the 50% match. So that's only recommended if you do not have a 50% match. You can apply under both programs. Also, the Recreational Trails program may work as well as a match for this program too. I will say that we had a great question in our last workshop today about the question was if we have staff time to only prepare one application between these three programs, which program is the least competitive? And you know, we can't predict what the 2022 cycle will present ourselves, but I can just say from the volume of RSVPs, HCF has received the least participation so far in workshops. So that is another indicator that this program may not be very competitive again this round, which is a bit of concern with a $6 million target. You know, yeah, definitely, we're happy you're taking a look at this program, and I think my bottom line message here is feel free to request more than the past. We'd like to see the average request be higher than the past pattern of about 200,000 averaging per application. So I hope that tip is helpful. Okay, anything else to add about that, Richard or Natalie?
I don't have anything else, Vic.
Okay, so we have a question or comment from Judy, who said, "I thought match cannot be state funds." The Land and Water, both the Land and Water Conservation Fund as well as the Recreational Trails program are federal funds. So even though our office selects the projects, we then recommend those projects to the National Park Service or Federal Highways Administration for the federal funding. And so the answer is that definitely those two federal funding sources can be matched for this program. Okay, so thanks for that question, Judy. Okay. And Elizabeth is noticing that there's a timeline that says February 1st, but correct, the application deadline for the Habitat Conservation Fund is March 1st. not February 1st. And one of the reasons was that it does give a little bit of buffer in case you are thinking about applying for both Land and Water and Habitat Conservation Fund. There's a roughly a 4-week difference. So you could prepare the Land and Water application first, and then you could prepare the Habitat Conservation Fund secondly. So that was by design. So thank you for that catch, Elizabeth. Okay, so at this point, we'll be here till 3:30 unless there's no more questions. You can go ahead and continue asking questions or comments on the chat feature, or you can just raise your hand and we'll call on you. Okay, thank you. Oh, and for those that are still here, and I think there's only a few people, if you have any more questions about how these programs can match each other, if you don't have the 50% match, please email your project officer, and our project officer can help you. And I also like to emphasize that the team looks forward to helping you. Please don't be shy in asking for guidance. If you're thinking about several projects and you want some guidance on which one you think could be the best fit for a program, if you're trying to only proceed with one application, we can also help you with that as well. We can help scope out which project scope and location may be the best fit based on the categories for this program. On your screen here, you have a chart for the competitive project officer, and those will be your contacts for all 3 programs. On the left-hand side is the county, and so you'll base it on the county where the project will be located, and you'll then contact the person in the green column. So for example, if your project is in Alameda, you'll contact Megan Harrison. If it's in Alpine County, Nikki Lambert. Amador County, Esmeralda Bermudez, for example. Okay, so please take advantage of the team and send your emails. And there's no such thing as a bad question. We're here to help you. Okay, any more questions? You're welcome, Elizabeth, and thank you for your interest as well. Okay, looks like we have no more questions. I'll hang on for one more minute here, and if there's no more questions by about 3:23, we'll close the workshop. Any more questions? Just raise your hand or send a a chat post, and or else we'll close the workshop in about 30 seconds. All right, team, you can go ahead and stop the recording and close the workshop. Thank you, everyone.